America is essentially a dream.
Just enough to scare it, then swim back for more. I ask myself why. Just what does it mean?
Good evening. Welcome to Network X. I'm your host tonight, David Fisher. Tonight, I know it's been a horrific day and afternoon, and we're going on to the evening. We'll continue here, and we're in very tragic times indeed. So I'd like to make note of that moment before I introduce my guest, Sally Soriano. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sally's running for Seattle School Board position number 4, and we're going to talk a little bit about her campaign. So stay tuned. I'm going to start it off here. First of all, Sally does come endorsed. There's a question we like to pose, Sally. Who is the public in public education?
The public in public education, I feel, are the teachers, the students, the parents, and the community at large. And I think that's what's been missing from the school board and needs to be put back in there. I'm very excited about this race because there's about 5 of us running in 3 races who really represent the same issues as I represent them.
Sally Soriano tonight, who is comes very well endorsed by the public, actually. She talks about the public. She's been involved in public institutions herself and working for the public good. That's why people work in the public sector. She's endorsed, I'll just name a few of these organizations: Seattle Education Association, King County Labor Council, the Green Party of Seattle, the Campaign for Commercial-Free Schools, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. The Seattle Committee to Save Schools, CMAC. What does that mean, Sally?
It's the organization, gay lesbian organization.
Oh, okay,
that,
excellent.
Metropolitan organization that endorses.
Okay. Jolene Unseld, former King County rep, from District 4.
Congressional rep.
Congressional rep.
Went to Congress from Olympia, the Olympia area, Thurston County.
Velma Valori, state representative. Sharon Tomiko Santos, state senator, whose mother was also a school teacher. Maggie Femia, King County. Larry Gossett, King County. These are council members. Brian Derdosky, former county minister. The list is long. I won't continue with that.
Thank you.
So she comes well representing the public sector. The first question I really want to ask is, why are you running?
Well, I'm running because parents and teachers both came to me and asked me if I would run in the 4th position, which is Magnolia, Ballard, Queen Anne. It runs from Ballard down to Belltown in downtown Seattle, from Phinney Ridge, goes along West Lake and over to Puget Sound. That is a seat that was held by Don Nielsen. He's been head of the board of the school board, the chair of the school board, and now has taken a leave from it to run a website on teacher training. And these parents and teachers asked me to run against Don Nielsen, and I said I would because he represents on the board business interests, and they felt, and I feel too, that the board has been headed in that direction. It needs to come back to education and needs to come back to the public sector. And I feel that my history, I have been on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin as an education professor. I was a community educator during leading up to the WTO, educating the citizens of Seattle about the 5-year record of the WTO. And that was the main reason that I was approached, that I had done that education. And these parents and teachers felt that, that myself and then several other people who were running needed to move on to the board so that this board could be more open to parents, students, and teachers in terms of the direction that it needs to take.
well referenced. Sally, when you worked with the WTO education in terms of educating the community, I think that's where the real asset was, because we had been sold a bill of goods on what free trade was, and you were able to point out through your educational, community education, that it was not really free, that there was a cost, and the real issue was fair trade, and put the focus on that. So hopefully you'll be able to do some of that if you are elected in the school board.
Well, one of the things I think I learned from WTO that I can bring into this race in the school board is that, you know, as the WTO was coming into Seattle, all the people who were advocating for it said to the population, they said that this is so complex, none of you can really understand it, you know, pat us on the head, just let us handle this and you just, you know, live your life. And when we looked at it, when we looked at the 5-year record of the WTO, we saw really clearly what had been happening. And this is a tribunal system that is overturning our laws. So when those of us who are running for the school board start, for example, looking at the budget of the school board, it's very hard to read. There's 2 different books and the numbers don't add up in either of them. It's hard to see where the grant money is coming from and the strings that are attached to it. So we're all asking those kinds of questions. We're saying, look, you know, we asked the WTO to be transparent. We want a public sector entity, the Seattle School District, to also be transparent so that anybody in the population can look at a budget and say, we understand where this money is coming from and we understand where it's going.
So, in other words, that's a real clear issue, is that the budget is kind of shrouded in secrecy
Right.
and diversified so much that you really can't look at it and see what's there. The emphasis of privatization, which is also privatization of trade laws, privatization of our Constitution, you see privatization in the public education. You have a campaign for commercial-free schools has endorsed you. What are some of the issues there?
Well, one of the issues is that, let me just step back a little bit. I worked on Alex Stevens' campaign, who ran for school board against Jan Kumasaka 3 years ago. And in that campaign, I was working on Alex's policy, and Alex at first didn't take a position against the Coke contract. This was pending in front of the Seattle School Board, whether or not they're going to sign this Coke contract. And so we got information about this commercialization of the schools, of the public schools. If you sign the Coke contract, what happens in relationship to this? So then Alex decided to take a position opposing the Coke contract. Jan Kumasaka, who is now on the school board, then in the debate said that she would also take a position opposing the Coke contract. When she won the election, got on the school board, and she then voted in favor of this Coke contract. I don't know exactly what the Coke contract entails in the Seattle School District, but I know I read an article about a school board member in Colorado. 3 districts went together in Colorado, signed a 10-year contract with Coca-Cola for $27 million. And what would happen is that that was the only beverage that could be poured in those schools, besides milk, and that one high school could put up to 20 Coke machines in the high school. So this was what was signed away for the next 10 years. And this school board member said, no, you know, we are not going to have a commercial entity coming into the schools. This really, you know, it fogs what exactly education and teachers are doing in a public school when you have this commercialization happening. Besides, students should be drinking juice, they should be drinking water. You know, this shouldn't be promoted. I mean, at a time when diabetes and childhood diabetes in the world has tripled. And we're going ahead and allowing this kind of corporation to come into the schools. So it's happening, and then you let this happen, and then the schools, it looks to businesses like, you know, here's a place where we can just go make money off of these kids. And I completely oppose that. I think that what needs to happen is that the school board needs to go to the state legislature and to demand tax-based money in order to run the schools. That's not coming necessarily from taxpayers, from working people, because I think they're taxed to the hilt. I don't think that they can pay anymore, but there's a lot of corporate welfare. In this state, there's over $350 million of years of subsidies going to businesses that are supposedly generating jobs. Well, if they're not generating jobs, then that money needs to come back into the tax base. And number 1, raise teachers' salaries, and number 2, lower class size. So schools cannot be seen as charities. where businesses can dump their money in and then have some strings on what's going to happen in future years with those schools. We need to get back the public schools for the public sector. They need to be answerable to the public. They need to have a tax base from our taxpayers' money. And teachers need more input, students need more input, and the community needs more input into what is happening with the school district.
So the inequities in the school system, where you start offering corporate resources to some schools and developing new programs, and other schools don't get the same corporate resources, so you've created an inequity there, and then they sort of fall all over themselves.
Yeah, I don't think that it's, some schools necessarily, like, some corporate money here and other corporate money not there. I mean, I think some schools should be getting more money depending on, the income base of that community, because in communities where you have students that have less resources, in their homes, for example, less social service resources, maybe the south side as compared to the north side, you do need more support staff, you do need more social services, school nurse, for example, in those schools. But when this is corporate money coming in, what I'm looking at with the budget is that I can't tell what, where it's going, what the strings are attached, what the schools have to do in order to keep getting that money, and when it's cut off, if then school district money has to be put in its place. So those kinds of things need to be out on the table. We need to be looking at those, and also, if there is some corporate money coming in, fine, but it cannot be without an understanding of where it's coming from.
Okay, and that's a good point. So you're saying that there's two pots of money. There's the private corporate money and then the public money, and somehow those budgets get shrouded and you don't really see the linkage between them and where they come from and what the strings are that are attached.
Right, right.
Okay, good point. Let's see, on, I guess, standards and assessment, the WASL.
The WASL test is a standardized test, and a standardized test is a test that is done throughout the state of Washington State. It's being done all over. Standardized tests are now the big movement in the United States. And as Senator Paul Wellstone says, what it is it's great for a bumper sticker, that standardized tests will prove that there's credibility for teachers, there's credibility for the school system. So what happens is, I'm not sure the exact number in this state, but I know in Massachusetts, to do standardized tests, it's $10 million a year. That's the cost to the taxpayers. And in this state, what we have is a WASL is taken at 4th grade, it's taken at 7th grade, and it's taken at 10th grade. And the problem with this is that, number one is that teachers don't get feedback on the test. So I know a kindergarten teacher in an inner city school here in Seattle, and she says that in her school, the scores are low compared to the north side schools. But she doesn't know in any way how to raise this kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade scores to do better on the WASL because she can never see the test. So she doesn't know what she's trying to educate those students for. And they tell her that it's in order to benefit the curriculum, to get feedback on the curriculum. So I say, well, if that's the reason for it, then why are you publishing these scores in the newspapers? You end up with these scores being put in the newspapers, and as one writer, an author says, that Alfie Kohn says that these scores should belong on the sports page. They shouldn't be in the newspaper, because actually what these scores show is they show parents' income. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You look at the scores from schools of low-income parents, and they're low. You look at the scores on the north side from higher-income parents, and they're high. And now everyone in Seattle is focused on these scores. 7th graders want to know their scores, want to quote their scores to another student, and they're meaningless. There's no meaning to these scores. And so nationally, there's a whole movement. This summer, there was demonstrations in 10 or 11 states with students saying no, they were going to now refuse to take these tests. Because why pay this much money for a test that doesn't really show anything to a student or to a teacher? Why not have a test that gives feedback to the teacher about how they're teaching, gives feedback to the student about what they're doing? But these tests are off someplace, and actually they're not someplace. There was an educational testing service. Educational testing service last year made $650 million a year in profit. So you say, okay, they bring down this test score. Teachers can't see it, students can't see it, parents don't know what it means. And which I think is, really sends the whole classroom up a certain road, which is very frustrating for everyone. And Educational Testing Service makes these huge profits.
So it's a $1 billion business, basically.
Yes, yes.
And somehow the public, they're skimming off, like you say, just now they got $500 million and over $500 million in profits last year, skimming that off out of the public sector, I'm assuming,
right.
which could be used for
raising teachers' salaries and lowering class size. And my problem is that, I've been reading about this, people have been telling me this, and when I talk to actual teachers, they say, yes, in fact, this is true. And I'm saying that as a school board member, that I want to have a feedback process so that when any issue like this comes up, that teachers and students are not put in agony for years and years and years and years saying that there's nothing that they can do, that there's an automatic feedback process. This isn't working for us. This isn't working for our classroom. It's not working for the parents. So we need something else to put in its place. And you don't keep putting this $10 million into this system.
You know, and the point you were making, which I think there's a correlation that is obvious. When you look at test scores, you can see economic divisions. And so obviously the disparity then is the economic disparity.
Yeah, it is. And there's this book called Standardized Minds by Peter Sachs, who's an author from Idaho. And he says actually in this book, the SAT, which is another standardized test, which high school students take in order to have entry into some colleges. There's a lot of colleges that are dropping it right now. The SAT shows what? Shows your parents' income. Does not show how you will do in college. What shows how you do in college are your high school test grades. That's the correlation to college. So why are we giving this test? I mean, it's mythical. It doesn't have any kind of meaning. And I'm talking to some of the Seattle public school teachers, and they say, there's a Stanley Kaplan, which is this little testing place, over at the University Ave and different places like that. And they're saying if they're going to be faced with this WASL year after year after year, let's just create some little Stanley Kaplans and teach these kids, they can go Saturday morning and learn how to take the test. I mean, is this where we want to go? So that we have test takers as opposed to creative thinkers in elementary school, critical thinkers, in high school where they have an analysis, they go into a classroom conversation, they form their opinion, they have a debate, and they do more research. I mean, that's critical thinking. This is what I think most of the teachers that I talk to, most of the parents, most of the students, this is what they want to develop in schools. So I think we've lost the goal of the public schools, and we've lost the goal because on the board has ended up being millionaires, Don Nielsen, for example, business people, Superintendent Olszewski, for example, and other board members who are afraid to stand up to these corporate interests, who when they're told there's no tax-based money, then they say, oh, well, then we have to sign the Coke contract. There's no other possibility. So we really need school board members who can stand up to these kinds of pressures. There's 5 or 6 of us running right now. Any one of us would be, good in that position who can do that.
Fabulous. So we're starting to get a feel for who the public is in public education.
Right.
Let's continue on here. So standards and assessment, the WASL itself, I believe has been pointed out. I mean, Howard Gardner at Harvard, one of their own institutions of the business community, has come forth and said that one of the strongest factor is reflection. And the WASL, despite that, and we're talking reflection over periods of time, not over a day or two. Right. And of course, these tests don't make any room for which is considered to be one of the #1 components of creative writing.
It's a multiple choice test, and you just fill in the little testing thing. I mean, I took a test one time, the graduate record exam, and I came 30 points below what I needed. I was trying to get into Stanford, and so my advisor says to me, she says, "You go take the test and get 30 points higher." And I said, "Okay." So I walked down the street. This is 1980. I hand Stanley Kaplan $150. Take home the materials, read it, study for it. Walk in to take this test for the second time, the GRE. It was the exact same test as I had studied from Stanley Kaplan.
My goodness.
And I'm saying, okay, I'm going to get 100%. And I just about did get 100%. I asked my friends from the Department of Education, how does this at Stanford, how does this happen? And they said, well, Stanley Kaplan pays people to go in, memorize sections of the test, come out, put it on your test, that you paid $150 for, so that it's a money-making thing out here, that if you have the money, you are on the inside game, and you can pass the test. So again, when we're talking about
these are our doctors and lawyers.
These are our doctors and lawyers. So, but again, it's like, do you want an inside game in a public institution? I don't think so. We want everybody to be able to participate in the game, and it's not so that it's not insiders know how to do it and outsiders don't know how. This is a public institution paid for with taxpayers' money, and so we're going to have all kids achieve, all kids become critical thinkers, all kids be able to take on society as they want to, and this is our goal.
And so what is a high-stakes test in which these students are not going to graduate in year '08? What does that do to their learning process?
Right. Well, one thing is that also at fourth grade, I mean, they're thinking about stopping kids at fourth grade if they don't pass the test. And the issue is that number one is that the test is proving to be meaningless. And number two is what we need to do is we need to have a system where if kids are failing in fourth grade or up to fourth grade, that we can put the resources in there so that they can continue. The thing that Peter Sachs says in his book called Standardized Minds is that once a child flunks once, the chance of them dropping out is immense. If they flunk twice, there's 100% dropout. So we don't want kids to drop out of school. You know, we don't want them to be tracked into a criminal system. We don't want them to not feel that they're successful. So, you know, rather than this easy answer of just taking this test that is an elimination test, you know, it's not about everyone achieving. Our driver's test is about everyone passing it, right? This test, as it sits right now, is not about everyone passing. It's about flunking some of the kids, having them not pass and having them not go on. So we want to create a system that is not that. And I think that this is a business answer. It's an answer of comparing Grosse Pointe, Michigan to Palo Alto, California to Japan. And you have a layer of people who are on school boards across the country who are big corporate business interests who are defining these goals of these test scores as opposed to this kind of learning that we want to have happen for every child.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because Dr. Donald Orlick, who was a Washington State University education teacher in mathematics, specifically has examined the mathematics portion of the WASL and has concluded that for the three levels, fourth grade, seventh grade, and 10th grade, it was actually inappropriate in terms of the students had not reached the higher order learning levels that those tests were requiring. Yeah. And so it's actually a fraud. He calls it a dirty trick. So that's incongruent with the point you were making.
Yeah, I think higher education people in this community are very frustrated with the school board as it now exists in making these kinds of decisions. And they have to listen to educators. You know, this whole standardized movement was put in place at the headquarters of IBM with President Clinton, with CEOs. No educators were in this beginning discussion of these standardized tests.
Now, IBM, who's the personality that they used?
I can't remember the guy's name, but the CEO of IBM was formerly head of RJR Nabisco, and he's famous for putting the tobacco company, putting the Camel, Joe Camel logo in every low-income community to try to hook low-income kids on Camel cigarettes. And then he went to the head of IBM and immediately fired a third of the workforce at IBM, made millions of dollars, $15 million for firing a third of the workforce, and then became Clinton's right-hand person in then defining education in the United States. This is in 1997. And so, you know, this reminds me a lot of the WTO. It reminds me, or of NAFTA. You know, under NAFTA, we lowered the tariffs on corn to go into Mexico. The Cargill Corporation then made $370 million a year, flooding Mexican markets with corn and displacing 1 million Mexican farmers. Who made those decisions? You know, corporations made those decisions, putting in immiseration 1 million Mexican farmers. And I think so we have to go back. We have to have people, you know, on the school board who will look at where these decisions are coming from, go to the state legislature. The Unity Caucus in the state legislature, made up of members of color and some other white members, have come out against the WASL. The Seattle Education Association has come out against the WASL. So the state legislature needs to put pressure on Congress so that this money that's attached, this federal money for education that comes down, is not attached to standardized testing.
So let's say you're elected to the school board, position 4, Sally Soriano, let's say, gets elected. What happens? How do you orchestrate this? What should a school board do, or school board?
Well, first of all, we can talk to the state legislature about funding. You know, funding coming into the school district. Number 2 is we can talk to the state legislature about WASL, about the WASL test, and get them to support us in having a different form of a test. Like, for example, you can have a performance test. You can judge students by, you know, a project at the end of the year. You can have a diagnostic test where, you know, if you're a teacher, you give your curriculum to another teacher, and your teacher has an oral exam with your students about that. So there are those feedback mechanisms that have been happening, that can happen. You, of course, have a standardized curriculum. I mean, it exists. And you use that curriculum in relationship to your teaching. You have other teachers, tell you what works, what doesn't work, and what's working with your students. Immediate feedback for both of those. And we have achievement tests that you can take that tells your reading level, your math level, those kinds of things. Take that $10 million, again, give it to teachers, raise their salaries, reduce the class size, get the legislature to go along with that, and then get people in the legislature to talk to the congressional delegation about not having this federal money attached to these test scores. Right now, these test scores can determine whether or not a voucher can be given to a child who's failing in a public school setting. So it's a dismantling that's happening from the federal level, and we really need to have pressure from the state against that from happening.
Okay, I believe that sounds like a plan. So go to the legislature, organize the community, and once again, in organizing community obviously involves community education.
Right, and definitely educate the community about this. You can have these different authors of all these different books that have written these now in different states. They're organized. Students are having demonstrations in different states. One student says there's for the rich, there's standard for the rich. There's choice for standardized tests or for the rest of us. So this movement is happening. This state can participate in that. Parents can refuse to have their children take these tests. And we can start the movement here, get that money back, put that into education where it's needed, and move ahead with a really solid public education and also a multicultural education that really includes every child, every student in Seattle.
Okay, and we've got about a minute left here, Sally. Is there any poignant statement you want to make in our final?
If you know people in Ballard, Magnolia, or Queen Anne, please call them and tell them to vote for me in this election that's coming up. I am a very different candidate than the three I'm running against. They all hold a very status quo position in terms of the school board, and will do exactly what the school board is doing right now. And so I'm the candidate for change. So I hope you let them know that.
Sally Soriano, candidate for change, position 4, Seattle School Board, comes with quite a few credentials, and she has the expertise in community organizing. Looks like we have some choice for the voters this time. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Okay. For Network X, tonight was our show. We were looking at the Seattle School Board race, position 4, with Sally Soriano. I'm David Fisher. And we're wrapping it up, so unfortunately on the other stations, I'm sure we'll be back to the tragedy that is specifically happening in this country tonight. So a moment of silence.
America is essentially a dream.
Just enough to scare, then swim back